Everyone loves a good superhero story. I mean, there's a reason the MCU became so big, and a good chunk of it was the appeal of superheroes and their stories. They can be used to explore different stories, from those about growing as a person, loss, hope, bravery, belonging, and so much more. And of course, they look very cool. And who wouldn't want to have superpowers? A good chunk of the appeal of heroes comes first from them looking cool, second from the desire to also have cool powers, and third from the interesting and varied stories they can be used to tell. And these are all great things to be popular for, but there's one aspect of heroes which I think is sadly underexplored in media. It's not the grief and suffering that comes from watching people die, it's not the trauma that follows or the general hardships of the life. Although those are underexplored, just not as much. No, it's the simple or not so simple ways in which our society would be permanently changed by the mere presence of superheroes and supervillains. How the media would react to them, how they would react to the media, how they would interact with technology. The public, how would they curate an image for themselves, and even how being a superhero could become a legitimate job for otherwise ordinary people. Basically, how would a superhero society interact with capitalism and mass media? Even more than that, what about if there's more than one hero? What if there's tons of people with these powers? What dictates whether a person becomes a hero or a villain when they have great, or even a small amount, of power? What about the development of a hero or villain's image over time? These are all super interesting questions which are sorely underexplored in superhero media in general, but especially in mainstream superhero media. But, luckily for those like me who would love to hear more about the intricacies of being a hero, the training, the curation of a public image, making yourself literally a comic book character, there is one massive lifesaver floating around, or more like flying with superpowered jumps around. And as with many of the more interesting stories I find interest in, it isn't from America. That's right, you know it, you love it, or at least I presume so if you clicked on this video. It's This episode will discuss the history of the IP My Hero Academia, from manga origins to the anime, stage plays, and more. I'll then briefly discuss the reasons I wanted to make this episode, then the good things about the series, the character design, the powers, the superhero society, and the characters. I'll then discuss the bad things about the series, the lack of body diversity for female characters and the general misogyny, and of course, the biggest sin of them all, Mineta. Finally, I'll consider the series as a whole and judge whether it is overall good or bad. For this episode, obviously, spoilers will be included. Additionally, I will include a trigger warning for misogyny, sexual assault, domestic violence, and abuse of children, and for non-graphic discussions of violence, war, traumatic physical injury, and all of the other things you'd expect from a superhero story about children literally being trained to become superheroes. Please take a look at the timestamps in the description and be careful with this episode if you need to. Also, spoilers, duh. And of course, I leave the disclaimer that although I have watched and enjoyed a good chunk of the show, I have not watched the whole thing, nor have I read the manga. So take some things I say, especially concerning the later seasons and volumes, with a grain of salt. I'll do my best research, and I don't think that the strict facts are necessarily needed for what I'll be discussing today, but I may still get things wrong. I'm more interested in the concept of the show than the nitty-gritty minor changes between anime and manga, you know? I mean, I want to collect the manga eventually, but right now I just have too many books to read. Basically, I'm a relatively casual fan, so I know the things that casual fans know, but I don't have the same knowledge as a die-hard fan. My second disclaimer is that I wrote this episode over almost 3 years, so my apologies for the lack of structure. It's not as structured as I'd have liked it to be, but I think it expresses the chaos of my thoughts about the series and of the fandom well, and either way, it gets all of the important points down, in detail. Typical. So let's get into it. Spoilers ahead, you've been warned. The original manga was, as many popular mangas are, serialized in Weekly Shonen Jump. It was first serialized in 2014, written and illustrated by Horikoshi Kohei. At time of writing, it has 42 volumes and is still ongoing. An anime series based on the series began airing in April 2016 and is also ongoing with 159 episodes at time of writing. Now that I'm recording, I feel like it might have finished. I feel like the manga might have finished as well. But I'm not entirely sure. Although the anime will be the media basis for this episode, most of my discussion will focus on themes which are present in both the anime and manga. The manga follows the story of Midoriya Izuku, a boy who doesn't have any superpowers in a world where about 80% of the population have powers or quirks. However, he has dreamed since he was young of becoming a great superhero, like his idol, the top hero called All Might. The story follows Midoriya as he trains to become a hero, focusing on his school class and their antics, the relationship between superheroes and villains, and explores many of the nuances of a world filled with superheroes, where agencies are developed around marketing heroes, selling merch, and increasing rankings, since, well, they may be risking their lives daily, but they're celebrities. And as All Might often explains, they have to smile and keep this image up, even when they're literally on the verge of death. A very poignant message that has become the basis of my interest in the franchise. Since it was initially published in 2014, the franchise has been very successful, as expected of a Shonen Jump series. It has been at the top of many reader-recommended lists, has become uber popular internationally, and any convention you go to anywhere in the world is bound to have at least 5 people cosplaying Midoriya. I'm not kidding, I went to some random convention in Adelaide. Adelaide, of all places, and I think I saw at least 20 Midoriyas. It's been a massive commercial success ever since the first volume was released and has won many manga and book awards. The simple fact that a manga was made within 2 years of the publishing of the show shows its success. And even beyond that, we can see how big it has grown with how many mediums it has grown into. It has spin-offs, OVAs, films, including a planned live-action film, video games, and even a very intense and hilarious musical stage play production, parts of which can be found online. There are 4 total parts to the play, and holy moly do I wish I could see it in person because it looks great. And it looks like it really respects the source material. The series has become popular internationally, as previously mentioned, and has apparently sold over 85 million copies up until February 2023. As a matter of interest, that's like when I started writing this episode, so that tells you how long this has been going on for. I'm not quite sure how to verify its position on the top manga or anime lists, but I have no doubt that both are in the top 10. I frequently see them discussed on the same level as shows like Attack on Titan, One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball, and Haikyuu. Going into even a very white bookshop in my hometown of Sydney will yield at least a few volumes of the manga, and going to a specialised comic book shop will see it as one of the main non-American attractions, sometimes even with a whole bookshelf to itself. Needless to say, it's popular, and as I'll discuss, for a very good reason. So with that quick background, let's discuss why I wanted to make this video. Why this topic? My Hero Academia, or as I may say from now on, MHA, is massively popular and has been analysed and discussed to death. What could I possibly analyse from it or add to the conversation? Well, probably not much, and most of what I'm doing here is synthesizing my own beliefs with the insane number of videos I've seen on the topic, but I'll do my best. MHA has been the topic of countless video essays or discussion posts online, which clearly shows both its popularity and its divisiveness. I find this fascinating, hence my desire to synthesize all of this information. I'll put all of the videos I watched in the reference document in the description, even if I didn't actually use them when writing this script. I'll also note which specific essays impacted my understanding of the series, since a few did, but like most of them didn't. I hope to provide a pretty comprehensive and well-rounded overview of the positives and negatives of the series here, thus providing the only wisdom I can really add to this discussion, the importance of nuance, while also providing you with lots of further viewing content if you want it. When I first began to write this episode all the way back in 2023, it was initially supposed to be episode 5, can you believe? In this section, I wrote that I wanted to make this episode because I really like how MHA handles the concept of superheroes and how a superpowered society would interact with capitalism and mass media, right? Literally what I said earlier. But I've since rewatched the first 3 seasons of the anime and have engaged with more fan discussions of the plot and characters, and I came to realize that most of the things I really like about the show are influenced significantly by how much fanfiction around it has delved into those interesting concepts. Just keep that in mind for later. Basically, now my opinion is far more nuanced and not just all positive anymore. Now I'm more interested in how MHA has both extreme highs and lows, and how it has a fascinating mix of very good and very bad elements. One thing that's really fascinating about this anime is that it has a very wide fandom, as do most popular shonens, which means that when you look at fan content online, you find lots of interesting discussions from various perspectives, and those are the discussions I want to look at today. I also find the fandom interactions with the source media and creator interesting. Apparently, Horikoshi was focused on the idea of what makes a hero when he was writing it, and thus wanted to emphasize elements like determination and perseverance, selflessness, and to, therefore, focus on the commercialization of heroes, and the horror that can come from things like this. And if you don't think that's interesting, why are you watching this video? That's one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. A lot of mainstream superhero media may explore the horror of being a hero, seeing people die, being traumatized, etc., but very few discuss the commercialization, idolization, and thus dehumanization of superheroes. Franchises like The Avengers casually ignore how the Avengers would become a product to be sold. There is almost no mention of media and public attitudes to heroes other than in Spider-Man and Civil War. And even then, it's just like, there's some heroes. No one likes them because they blew up some people. It's very shallow, but MHA has depth, or at the very least, implied depth. It's hard to express in words how much potential depth this series has. Fascinatingly to me, it has kind of become a fact of life that in this universe, a hero is only worth their public image. Which is all well and good until it isn't properly explored. Like I said earlier, MHA has its massive highs, music, wide appeal, and unique themes, but also its terrible lows. Misogyny left and right, underexplored themes and world building, unsatisfying and deeply lacking character development, and Mineta. Ew, Mineta. The interplay between both the good and the bad, how the fans react to them, and how they are presented make this series very interesting to me, hence my wish to make this video. I watched all of the anime in about 2017, but since then both it and the manga have obviously been updated. I revisited the anime in sections for this episode, but as I mentioned earlier, my knowledge is far from extensive, as for the most part I avoid anime fandoms and haven't spent much time consuming MHA in recent years. That hasn't reduced my interest in it though. I mean, throughout the entirety of my K-pop PR video, you could see that my Discord profile is literally Tokoyami, so I guess that shows my love for the show. So with that said, here is your disclaimer for 1, some potentially inaccurate or somewhat outdated information, and 2, spoilers. Lots and lots of spoilers, mostly for the beginning and middle of the story, but possibly for later parts as well. So let's start on a positive note, the good things about the show. MHA has many things going for it. It must for it to get so big, right? In this section of the video, I'll discuss all of the positives of the show. Duh. I'll start with a speed round of things which don't need much explanation, like the music, and then we'll discuss character designs and the quirk system, and then some of the unique themes the series touches on. So let's get into it, starting with the speed round. Okay, so first of all, I don't think I've literally seen anyone, no matter how much they hate the series, have a complaint about its music. That is unsurprising. Most popular shonens, or even popular anime in general, seem to have great soundtracks which give insight into character arcs and plot points, and are generally hype. The MHA soundtrack is top tier, and I love almost all of the openings and endings too. Zero skips. Like I said, even the people who are most critical about the series seem happy to admit that the soundtrack is epic. Second, and in a similar vein, the manga, but especially the anime, really appeal to a wide shonen audience. Most people seem to be able to find at least something they like about it. This is a common shonen tactic. There's cool battle sequences for people who like those. There are more light-hearted and lower stakes fights for people who like those. There are slice of life episodes, there's montages, there's both serious and funny moments. There's cool animation, interesting character designs, and characters that appeal to anyone, no matter how niche their interests. Having a wide and varied cast of characters engaged in a wide range of activities is a prime way shonens appeal to a wider audience. Hence, one of the reasons they're so popular. It does mean that they can't do anything too extreme in fear of losing that audience, something people have pointed out as an issue with MHA, but it also means they're super popular, so it's definitely financially worth it. One thing I especially like about many shonens, and especially MHA, is how they tend to follow very nice interest curves. Although some people have complained about how one episode the characters can be fighting to stop the end of the world, and in the next they're unrealistically back in school like nothing happened, leading to plot stagnation, this is actually a really simple and good way in which shows like this follow an interest curve. Audiences may love action, but they can't deal with action constantly for episodes on end. So, shows have to break up this action with slower moments, whether they be emotional backstory flashbacks or slice of life episodes, which has the added benefit of, you guessed it, drawing more fans in with fun banter and deep and angsty characters. Speaking of, these shows have massive casts. Just look at any shonen lineup poster and there's like hundreds of characters. They're the complete opposite of contained. This serves two purposes. First, it makes the world feel larger through virtue of tons of people living in it, and second, it makes the world feel larger through having more characters. That may sound like exactly the same thing, but hear me out. The first one is basically, when we see tons of side characters with unique designs running around, it creates the impression of a world populated with actual individuals, not just NPCs. MHA is really good at this. Any random shot of the street will have any number of people with physically obvious quirks, not just a whole bunch of random humans. The second point is that when we get a backstory and flashbacks for characters, no matter how sidelined the characters are or how tiny these flashbacks are, we learn more about them than just their face and basic character traits. The flashbacks being shallow or the characters being unimportant doesn't matter. The important part is that a huge number of characters, even side characters only appearing in a few episodes, are given flashbacks. This makes them seem like fleshed out characters even if they actually aren't, and provides them with an often sympathetic and tragic story which many audience members can relate to, or at least sympathise with. This is why you'll often see fanfiction, fan art, and other fan-created content about even super unimportant characters, because their stories, no matter how shallow, resonate with at least a few fans who latch onto them above all other characters. Anyway, the idea that everyone has something going on in their lives and that everyone is the main character of their own story is one that is big in shonens, and makes the world feel more like it's populated with real people, as opposed to cardboard cutouts, which I feel like happens with a lot of superhero movies. How effective is this tactic at actually creating large worlds? Not much really, and it falls flat in MHA, but the goal has never been to actually create a populated world, but instead to create the feeling of one which keeps fans interested. Okay, so with all of that said, let's talk about character design. I'll discuss two aspects of character design here: physical designs and quirks. Superhero designs in popular American media are relatively stagnant in my opinion. It's one of a very select set of options: man in bodysuit, woman in bodysuit, woman in bikini, man in a slightly more revealing outfit, or man in mech. Comic books have far more diversity, but movie adaptations have really destroyed the diversity of designs, especially since they try to make them look more gritty and realistic. Lots of these on-screen superhero designs, I mean, if you made them all the same shade of grey, the literal only thing distinguishing them are a few accessories some characters have, like Batman's mask or Captain America's shield. And as cool as some of these designs are, there's only so many ways you can make man in bodysuit look unique. Take my word for it. I helped a friend design some of his own superheroes for a comic he wanted to do, and many struggles went into making the designs look like anything other than carbon copies of the references. It's not his fault, it's just how the industry has repeated the same design over and over and over. But MHA actively strays away from this and provides one of, if not the most varied cast of character designs, which is insane considering the massive number of characters it has. Many of the characters have unique aspects to them, whether they be main characters, side characters, or even background characters who only appear in a few frames or scenes. Sure, we do have the regular things, like Midnight as a woman in a bodysuit and All Might and Endeavour as men in bodysuits, but lots of characters, especially the students, are quite unique. Aizawa has his iconic scarf and goggles and his tracksuit getup. Bakugo could be a man in a bodysuit, but the addition of the gauntlets and the headpiece gives a lot of flavour. Midoriya and Todoroki have practical tracksuit outfits. Ida is heavily armoured, and Tokoyami literally has a bird's head and a shadow self. Shoji has 6 arms, and so on. The female designs are, sadly, as I'll discuss later, less interesting and more of girl in bodysuit, but they still have unique additions. Uraraka has her gauntlets, Jiro is more casually dressed and has her head jacks, Mina is literally pink and has her horns and the fur on her outfit, Tsuyu has her big bow and froggy self, and even Momo, who is practically in a bikini, has practicality in her outfit, the bookshelf on the back to help her creation, and plenty of bare skin to let that creation out. Many of the designs I mentioned have issues, but they are all unique and have a flair you wouldn't usually see in many mainstream superheroes. They also provide a lot of personality. Literally everyone knows what Bakugo or Aizawa's personalities are as soon as they see them, even if you haven't seen the show. And sure, some people do find it a bit frustrating or a bit of a turn-off to look at the MHA characters and instantly know their entire personality, their superpowers, and any potential tragic backstory. Ahem, Todoroki. But I personally think it's fun and interesting. Some people have pointed out how hilarious it is, how literal these character designs are, but the consensus from fans seems to be that this is a good thing. Characters are iconic and easily recognizable, even via silhouette. The character designs reflecting the powers and personalities of each hero reflects an important, subtle aspect of the world building, the need for heroes to market themselves carefully to appeal to as many fans as possible and climb the rankings. For instance, Endeavour fans in Universe love how his outfit and personality suit each other, and they love how unconventional and angry he is, whereas All Might fans love how both he and his design are the epitome of classic superhero. Their powers are their brand, and to fully capitalize off of that brand, they really should design their outfits to complement those powers and their image. This also leads nicely into another thing I like, that over the course of the story we see the heroes developing their costumes, both to develop their image as a hero and to improve the conduction of and support for their powers. Their costumes aren't impractical. There is a reason they're like that. Why does Captain America wear a bodysuit? Why does Black Widow? No clue, but I can tell you why Todoroki has the suit he does, to channel his powers and to not fall apart while using them. I can tell you why Bakugo has his gauntlets, why Ida has extra support on his exhaust pipes, why Momo has her bookshelf and her overly revealing suit, why Uraraka has her gauntlets, and why Aoyama has his belt, to help their powers. I can't really think of a character design in the series that is fully and completely bad. I mean, bad character design is to some extent subjective, and all of these designs have advantages and disadvantages, but there isn't one that I look at and go, "Ugh, that's trash," for. The closest I come with is the girls, but we'll talk more about them later. Anyway, the suits are designed to conduct the hero's powers, right? And to make up for their own weaknesses. Midoriya's supports his body, Bakugo's allows him to bypass his body's own restrictions, and so on. And this leads nicely into another aspect of MHA that both I and others love, the development of the quirks. The quirks are realistically one of the main draws of the show for people. The show and the manga came out during a time when superheroes were the big thing in media. I mean, superheroes are still a big thing, but I feel like the golden age of superhero films in the 2000s and 2010s has fizzled out a bit as the market has become oversaturated. Actually, now that I'm in 2025, not 2023, I think it's fizzled out a lot. Regardless, MHA markets itself with its superpowers, and all of the main moments of the show which draw people in, mostly Midoriya versus Todoroki at the sports festival, showcase these powers in big flashy battles. And after the initial flashy draw of the quirks, many people stay hooked on them because of one thing. With very few exceptions, MHA refuses to give its heroes powers without giving them equally powerful downsides. For instance, Tokoyami has a super powerful quirk, but at night it gets out of control, and when exposed to light, Dark Shadow becomes weak. Uraraka can reduce or remove the effect of gravity on objects, but vomits if she goes too far, becoming incapacitated. There are a few exceptions to this rule, which usually happens when heroes develop their skills. For instance, Todoroki can't overuse his ice powers without balancing them out with fire, or he'll freeze himself. This becomes completely irrelevant once he becomes able to use his fire. Midoriya is super powerful but breaks his body. Until he doesn't. Although the show doesn't really explore the consequences of the overuse of superpowers, certainly not as much as it could, this is clearly a very appealing aspect of the world to fans, who are used to superpowers with next to no downside. This is another thing we can see fans run wild with in fanfiction, as they develop the various possible downsides to each power. I've seen many, but one that I personally think is really compelling is the very possible, in fact probable, likelihood of Bakugo going deaf because of his explosions. This is a scientifically obvious result of his quirk, but isn't explored in the manga and anime, even though it could be really interesting. Bakugo canonically hates any weakness in himself, and would likely view the loss of his hearing as a weakness, especially in battle. How would he react to this development? We'll never know in the canon material, but fanfiction has run wild with it. This also ties nicely back into the development of characters' costumes over time, as they discover new things about their quirks and find new ways to support themselves. Another fun thing related to this that the show underexplores is how powers are developed, by characters pushing themselves to their limits and doing other unspeakable things. Like, surely we could develop some interesting character moments or some commentary on society through Ida pulling out his mufflers? Surely someone like Momo, who has to eat constantly to power her quirk, would develop an odd relationship with food? The interesting and sometimes horrifying ways in which characters push themselves to increase the limits of their powers is cool and underexplored, as with most things in this series. Wait, this is the positive part of the video. Whoops. Okay, moving on to interesting themes the story and the world explore. My Hero Academia explores various themes which have been historically underexplored in a lot of superhero media. They've certainly been underexplored in blockbuster superhero movies, which would have been the media that most people would have had the most exposure to when MHA came out. First, MHA goes into more detail than most superhero media about the harsh realities of a society where superheroes are loved and appreciated in the same way many celebrities are. As superheroes have become celebrities, they have to make public personas, the same way real celebrities do, for the sake of PR. This means that superheroes, as we see throughout the show and manga, need to be trained in PR and trained in their public image. They need to work with business students and support students to design their persona, their costume, to be iconic and give hope to the people. Taking this further, MHA also explores the importance of this image being consistent and likable, or at least garnering a fan base. All Might has been able to stay the #1 hero for so long, not just because he saves so many people and defeats so many villains, but because he's at the top of the popularity polls. He has a flawless and likable superhero image with no nicks or flaws. He needs to put on a mask, a personality that isn't his own, because that is the character he developed a long time ago, and that is the character that people look up to. In comparison, someone like Endeavor saves many people and is a very capable hero, but falls short in the PR department with his unlikable image. Notably though, Endeavor does have a small dedicated group of fans who appreciate his tougher, meaner image. Endeavor is a good example of someone who doesn't have a likable image, but who does have a strong and consistent public persona. Speaking of All Might and Endeavor, they both indicate a further and somewhat darker aspect of this persona, the importance of maintaining it at all costs. As the show points out many times, both explicitly and implicitly, if the persona of a hero crumbles, so does the public's confidence in that hero, and public confidence is key for a hero's success, and for hero society itself to continue. Hence, even when a hero is literally on the edge of death, they need to maintain this persona. This is where we see all of those scenes of All Might saying that he needs to smile through the pain to give the public hope, because his smile is a symbol of hope. The same thing is demonstrated when Endeavor raises his fist to show his victory after defeating the Nomu. He isn't doing it to gloat, he's doing it because he knows the public needs to see that. They need to know that he did survive, and thus there is hope to defeat such powerful villains. Another darker aspect of the importance of the hero persona is how it interacts with sexism and gendered perceptions in society. This obviously applies to things like male heroes needing to be buff and look strong or otherwise cool, which has its own implications. But the larger implication of this, which MHA mentions but doesn't explore in depth, is the nature of being a female superhero. Female heroes often feel pressured to have a sexier image to stand out, or otherwise are focused on more for their appearance than their abilities. This is nicely introduced through Mountain Lady's introduction at the start of the series, and is later seen during Momo's internship, when they need to take brand deals both for their public image and for the money. I'll discuss this more later since it could and should have been explored further, but it's still really interesting. Moving on from the various public-facing PR aspects of being a hero to more internal aspects of the theme of a superhero society, My Hero also explores, although unfortunately in far less detail, the negative social aspects of a superhero society, and by that I mean the reality that, as heroes become socially powerful and gain wealth like regular celebrities, people will inevitably want to do it just for the clout and the money. This should be a no-brainer. We see this in our real world, but in my admittedly limited knowledge, I've never seen another piece of superhero media, at least as mainstream as this one, which even mentions the idea that people might want to become heroes for money and clout. I guess Spider-Man Far From Home explores the idea of this, but only vaguely and only through the villain, i.e. someone with malicious intentions. Fantastic Four is about corporate superheroes, but doesn't explore the financial motivation, and Iron Man has to learn about the importance of being a hero for selfless reasons, but even then I don't think his arc has anything to do with the financial motivations of herohood. I'm not aware of any other Marvel or DC heroes in mainstream media that explore something like this. I mean, I feel like One Punch Man might have done something with this, but it's been like 10 years since I saw that, and it's an anime, so it's not even mainstream American media anyway. And unfortunately for those of us with a disdain of America, America is the current capital of superhero media, although I feel like it's switching more to Japan now. Yeah, I have no doubt that at least some comics have explored this because I feel like the larger comic companies have made so many volumes and so many universes over so many decades that they've explored everything under the sun, but I've never actually heard of which have, if any. Anyway, unfortunately, My Hero doesn't explore this as well as it could, but it does explore the idea of people wanting to become heroes for money, and characterizes this primarily through Uraraka, whose sole motivation for becoming a hero is to gain money. This is an interesting subversion of the idea. We might expect someone who looks like Bakugo to be in it for the money, but instead it's the cute little girl who just wants everyone to be happy. This is an interesting and underexplored aspect of superhero society, and I'd love to chat about it more, but unfortunately, as you'll see, MHA is unique and great to mention this, but sadly also underexplores it itself. Next, onto a more sinister tone, something which we will also come back to later, quirk marriages. This is only ever explored for a small period during Todoroki's backstory, and is pretty much ignored for the rest of the story. Similarly to how it makes sense that in a superhero society people would be in it for the money, it also makes sense that people would try to raise their children for superhero life through any means necessary. And in the case of MHA, this manifests as people basically breeding designer babies to maximize their powers, hence Todoroki. Both of these themes are so interesting because they're very real aspects of our regular capitalist world, but it makes sense that they would show up in a superhero society too. People in the modern day want to become singers, actors, or celebrities in general because they want the money and power, and people in the real world do create designer babies, whether for aesthetic reasons, to choose the child's sex, or even to just try and avoid inherited diseases. People also raise their kids from birth to become celebrities and influencers through beauty pageants, family vlog accounts, child acting, and more. It's an easy parallel to see, and just as this leads to child abuse in the real world, it also leads to child abuse in the show. I think the logical reframing of our regular society into a superhero society, where instead of the world becoming idealized because of heroes, the problems in the real world are just reframed into a different context, is one of the ways in which MHA is strongest. Because all of the social issues in the show are just issues in the regular world which have been logically translated into the fantastical world of the show. They feel more realistic, and the world feels more fleshed out and alive, which is, I think, one of the things that draws people into MHA. Now for another issue with the society of My Hero, which seems lifted from the real world, the implications of the mass documentation, surveillance, and control of quirks. This is something which is most relevant for the backstories of a lot of villains, especially Shigaraki. In a society where quirks are categorized, measured, and have social implications, it makes sense that they would also be stigmatized. Hence, Shigaraki and many of the other villains become villains. Anything that seems weird or unattractive or unhelpful would no doubt receive extra scrutiny, especially considering Japan is collectivistic, something I'll discuss more in a moment. Although, as with all of the themes here, something this interesting should be discussed in more detail, it is a positive point in My Hero's favour that the show touches on how some people, through no fault of their own, just genetics, have quirks which are deemed as sinister or villainous by society. This leads to stigmatization and exclusion, the trauma from which leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy where the traumatized children feel excluded, become hateful, and grow up to become villains. We even see how this stigma can affect other people, like Bakugo. Many people believe that he will become a villain because of his quirk and personality. The trauma of excluded children is a very interesting topic which could provide commentary on the real world, but these interesting statements are sidelined for the rest of the story, which I think is a shame. But we'll discuss that more later. For now, let me just say that it's really interesting that the show touches on the effects of stigmatization and how that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's also interesting to note how similar this system is to various forms of medical racism and scientific racism throughout history. Kids with unusual quirks being deemed as automatic villains because of something that's hereditary seems awfully similar to assuming that all black people are strong and violent, or to phrenology, the idea that someone's skull shape predisposes them to being a criminal or not, i.e., it's pseudoscience. Now, on to the last thing that I think really gives My Hero interesting theming. As Mother's Basement's video on the show points out, My Hero is set in Japan, a collectivistic society. For those who don't know, societies are broadly and somewhat simplistically, in fact very simplistically, sorted into individualistic and collectivistic ones. Individualistic ones, the prime example being America, tend to emphasize the benefits to the individual and the importance of being an individual over the importance of the collective good or being part of a group. In contrast, collectivistic cultures, the prime example being China, place more importance on the good of the group and being part of the group as opposed to being an individual. These individualistic versus collectivistic states have been developed through the history of each country. For instance, Chinese culture is very influenced by Confucianism, which emphasizes filial piety and the collective good, while American culture is influenced by breaking off from the UK and, of course, the rise of capitalism, which emphasizes the individual. Fun fact, you can roughly test which category you as an individual fall under by doing an exercise in which you write down 20 statements about yourself. For instance, about activities you do, personality traits, etc. Apparently, and when I say apparently, it's because I don't remember where the evidence came from or if it was a reliable source, people who live in a collectivistic society write almost all statements in relation to their group membership. Things like, I am a member of X baseball team, or I am a school student, as opposed to those in individualistic cultures who largely write individual traits like I am smart or I do Y activity. Boy, does that explain a lot about the US. Basically, these states, individualistic versus collectivistic, although there are overlaps, for instance in groups of Chinese immigrants in the US, influence an insane amount about the culture of each country and can be most easily seen through the media coming out of that country. Hence, since we're talking about superheroes, is a good comparison made by Mother's Basement. American superhero media tends to emphasize the hero as a lone vigilante, someone who has at least some selfish motivations, and who is often seeking revenge against the villain, or otherwise needs to prove themselves. A superhero society in American media universes is made up of a group of individuals who resist the government who tries to track them down and often involves very interpersonal issues. In comparison, My Hero and by extension other anime hero universes stand out because they fully and uniquely reflect how a hero society would function in a collectivistic culture. As Mother's Basement points out, in My Hero, quirks, which are individual powers and traits, have been repurposed and harnessed for the good of society as a whole. They are categorized, surveyed, and stored, ostensibly for the good and safety of the public, and this is used to put quirks to use for society. For instance, heroes are assigned different roles based on their quirks and how useful said quirks are for various environments and purposes. Support, fighting certain types of villains, and so on. We further see people, whether heroes or civilians, using their powers for regular jobs basically, for instance, Cementos being involved in construction. In My Hero, individuals, whether they dream of becoming heroes or not, are culturally expected to use their quirks for good in some way or another. This is one of the reasons why, as we previously discussed, some quirks are stigmatized. Quirks, like stains, seem to have no proper use in society, hence he is stigmatized. You could also apply this to Shigaraki and others, and this stigma, as I mentioned earlier, even reaches people who actually have good intentions, just destructive quirks, like Bakugo. In contrast, people who have more obviously protective quirks, like Fat Gum, Kirishima, Momo, and Eraserhead, are seen as more heroic, even if they are a bit unconventional, PR-wise, like Eraserhead. they're still all praised for their heroism and have quirks which are seen as clearly useful to society, even if that use is just literally fighting villains. Honestly, I don't think those are the best examples, but you can still probably see my point, and the contrast between those with supposedly useless quirks and supposedly useful quirks. In My Hero, a hero exists not to serve their own interests, but to serve society. And if the heroes fail to serve society, either by failing to stop a villain, or through the collapse of someone like All Might, the symbol of peace, the public will fight back. This is something that My Hero explores the implications of pretty well. The heroes always have to be stressed about maintaining the faith of the public, and when All Might retires, the resulting public backlash threatens to undermine hero society. This is like possibly the most collectivistic kind of story I think a superhero society could explore. In a world where heroes serve the people, what happens when they are no longer capable of doing that? I'm starting to repeat myself, so let me just say that this is a pretty cool way to take something that is inspired by American comics and superheroes and make it uniquely Japanese. And with that said, we've discussed all of the main interesting ideas and themes I think MHA explores. It also means, unfortunately, we've discussed all of the positive things I wanted to discuss about the show, so now let's move on to the other side, the negative things. The vast majority of the bad things associated with My Hero Academia are just missed opportunities, or things that would have been better explored in more detail. So here I'll discuss all of the various negatives associated with the show, starting with the misogyny, then character concerns, missed opportunities, and a lack of following up on world-building hints, and some overarching plot and arc criticisms. I'll also touch on the fandom and things like shipping. So with that said, let's get into it. Misogyny is a very contentious subject in relation to MHA. People either seem to think that it's non-existent, and the people who complain are haters, or they think it's the single biggest issue with the series and is fully rampant. As I'm sure you can imagine, from my understanding, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but honestly, if I had to say, I think it's far closer to the rampant side. Many a fan and ex-fan of the series have pointed out how Horikoshi just doesn't seem very interested in engaging with the stories of his female characters. He sets up tons of interesting female characters and teases their storylines, which is more than can be said for a lot of shonens, to be fair. But then he just doesn't do anything with them. It's maddening. So, first of all, there's a lack of body diversity for women in the series. While men have a very wide range of body types, thin, fat, tall, short, wiry, muscly, etc., almost every woman in the series is the same, thin and somewhat curvy. Some are slightly taller, like Momo, and some are slightly shorter, like Suyu, but they're all very similar. The female character I can think of who is the most different from this typical body type is Mirko, because she's mega muscly, but even then she's still pretty slim and curvy. Also, while the male heroes have lots of cool extra body features, like Tokoyami literally being a bird and Shoji having extra arms, the female characters never do, because they need to look pretty and sexy. Just compare male characters like Tokoyami with female characters like Tsuyu and Ryuko. Even though Ryuko and Tsuyu are literally animals and Tokoyami isn't, Tokoyami's the one who gets the animal features while the girls don't, because I guess, God forbid we have a girl with a frog head or with massive frog legs or covered in scales or something. Make no mistake, this fault is far from exclusive to My Hero. It exists across almost all pieces of superhero and related medias, including films, video games, and more. And when I say this, I mean both the greater diversity of body types for male characters, and male characters being allowed to have more animalistic features, if applicable. To give another example I've talked about on this channel, League of Legends. In League, we have two main animal races relevant to this discussion, the Yordles and the Vastaya. For both of these races, the female characters are less animalistic, more human, and more conventionally attractive than the male characters. For instance, Poppy and Tristana are basically just small people, whereas Fizz and Heimerdinger are borderline animals. For the Vastaya, this is more obvious. Wukong and Rengar are literally animals with some slight human features, but characters like Ari, Zaya, and Aurora are literally just hot women with ears and/or tails and wings tacked onto them. Even female characters who are supposed to be more animalistic than the usual Vastaya, like Nico and Nidalee, are just hot women with some face paint and ears/tails. On the flip side, the only male Vastaya who aren't basically animals are Set and my boy Rakan. Set makes sense because he's only half Vastaya, and Rakan was likely made more human to make him fit in more with Zaya. I can practically guarantee to you that if he was released alone, he would have basically been a bird. And as it is, he is more animalistic than her. He has more feathers than her, he has larger bird-like horns/ears, and while she just has her bird feet, ears, and wing, he also has a tail. These are just a small number of examples, but I think they illustrate the point well. Where are all of the animal mutant ladies? I mean, in the manga, Uraraka wasn't as slim. She still fit this typical body type, but she was like, not super duper skinny. A tiny bit chubby, if you will. But for some reason, i.e. aesthetic and probably sexual appeal, she was made skinnier in the anime, removing some of the only female body diversity we had to begin with. The next issue that is kind of related to this is the objectification of female characters. Every single female character in the show is either objectified by the other characters or by the viewer/audience/director/animators. Even ones you wouldn't think are conventionally sexy, like Suyu and Jiru, are explicitly sexualized by the plot when Mineta pervs on them. Even though most viewers don't like Mineta, the fact that he finds them hot encourages the viewer to find them hot. And even though most people don't like him, the show wants you to like him. But we'll get to him more later. The point is that he and other characters like Kaminari are used to objectify the women of the show, always against their own will. For instance, think of the cheerleading costumes debacle, or again, Mineta trying to break into their bathroom and other related instances. I don't think I actually mentioned this in the script. If I do mention it later, then good on me, I guess. But when I say, like, even people you wouldn't think are conventionally sexy, right? The most obvious example of that is Eri. Why is Mineta making a statement about, like, oh, in X number of years, she's going to be so hot or whatever? That is a child. Like, does no one have any issues with this? Who wrote this into the show? And, you know, it would be one thing if Mineta, like, you know, the show acted like Mineta was the most terrible person to ever exist, but the show actively tries to make you like him by, like, showing that, oh, you know, he has to not perv on midnight, he has to win the battle, he has to, like, overcome his fears. Oh my goodness, look, he's growing as a person, he's becoming more brave. Like, I know he is also a child, but he's basically a pedophile. Like, is this not concerning to people? Let me move on. Then we have the far more salient issue that every other female character is over-sexualized for no reason. There's a billion examples of this. For instance, do Midnight and Momo's powers really require them to be that sexualized? Midnight can at least be excused through the idea that she's trying to market herself as sexy, a tactic likely used to gain her more attention and popularity. She's also weird for being sexy at a high school. But this just doesn't make sense for Momo. Yes, she literally needs exposed skin for her quirk to work, but how does that translate to her basically wearing undies and 2 tiny strips of fabric? Couldn't she at least have a full bodysuit and use all of the skin on her arms and legs? I'll talk more about her later, but it doesn't make sense that a bookish teenager would dress herself like this, especially considering how modest and unconfident she is. Many people have pointed out that this is a weird over-sexualized design for her. Again, a teenager, and that her design could have easily been practical for her quirk while also reflecting her personality more. To steal a quote from TB Skyen, she looks like the porn parody of herself. Many people have also praised the stage adaptation of MHA for making a tasteful and practical change to her costume. She still has a lot of exposed skin, but now, instead of, two tiny strips of fabric, she has a bodysuit, which can be unzipped to expose more skin if needed. I think it also has an open back, but maybe I'm misremembering that. The point is, this is such a better design choice for Momo. She's a very put together and presentable person, so why, when she gets on the battlefield, does she suddenly change into a really bad and unsexy stripper costume? There are infinite options for better designs which could and should have been used. There's, like I said, the stage outfit. A zip would be a very practical way for her to look presentable but also use her powers in battle. There's also the idea of using her arms and legs, like I said earlier, or the idea of her having a bodysuit with the back cut out. Honestly, I think the bodysuit with the back cut out is the best option for the show, because yes, as much as it is very strange that we're sexualizing this teenage girl, if we must do it, a backless bodysuit is 1, practical for her powers, exposing lots of skin on her back, which is like the single biggest surface on your body. 2, more in line with her character and personality, as she is putting together a front but is vulnerable from behind, i.e. insecure. And 3, in my opinion, far sexier than the original design. Yet again, it is weird to sexualize teenagers like this, but if you're going to do it, at least do a good job of it. Another option would be to have her wear her bodysuit, and then have her arms and legs covered by the same fabric Midnight wears, of a darker shade, of course. The fabric Midnight wears keeps her powers in, but can be quickly and easily torn/pulled aside to make way for it. And it seems to be some kind of self-repairing mesh or something. Since both Momo and Midnight have skin-based powers, it would make sense for Momo to use a similar feature in her costume. The reason I specify a darker colour for the fabric is that it would appear less like bare skin, as with Midnight, and more like a dark stocking type material, thus seemingly slightly more modest, as is appropriate for, a teenager. Momo is just one of many characters who experience this issue, but she's a good example of how, in MHA and other media, sexism and objectification often manifest themselves in excessively sexualized costumes, even when it's impractical for the character and/or out of character. Another admittedly quicker and less serious example is Uraraka. When she first receives her hero costume, she remarks on the fact that it's much tighter and more form-hugging than she intended, and she's embarrassed by this. And her costume is tight. That's one of the ways in which she's sexualized. I find it super bizarre that the show draws attention to this by having her comment on it, and then just decides to leave it that way. I know they don't get infinite costumes, but at the same time they kind of do, and the series does show us that students can change their costumes based on the season or otherwise rework or upgrade them, see Midoriya. So, if Uraraka was so embarrassed and uncomfortable with her costume being so tight, wouldn't she have changed it at the first possible opportunity? Also, by the way, who made that costume tighter? Was someone in the support staff perving on these kids? The implications of this are concerning. This is another example of characters acting out of character for the sake of sexualization. Not to mention the fact that the support team, who are presumably making the costumes, don't mess up anyone else's costume. This is like when you hear about women going to get either breast implants or reductions, and the male surgeon purposefully leaves the breasts bigger than the women wanted because he assumes that other men will like them more that way. What happened to women's autonomy? That's a dumb question, it never existed, but it's still annoying. Now, speaking of men making assumptions and over-sexualization and so on, we come to a massive issue. In fact, one of the biggest issues in the show. MHA fans disagree about many things, but I think the vast majority of the fanbase can agree that Mineta is a trash character. In fact, this is at the point where the vast majority of MHA fanfictions remove him altogether, as they should. There is nothing redeemable about Mineta. He doesn't add anything to the story, and anything interesting about his character could have easily been assigned to a far better member of the class. Wants to be a hero to be popular and popular with the girls? Okay, Kaminari. Bullied for his appearance and wants to prove himself? In a world with quirks, I'm kind of surprised that people like Mineta would be bullied for their appearance, so let's give it to Shoji or something. Somewhat pervy for the sake of comic relief? Kaminari is canonically like that and is a far better choice since, he doesn't make a habit of sexually assaulting people? He's still creepy, but he's nowhere near as bad. Speaking of what is probably the biggest issue with Mineta, the biggest issue of MHA himself, the sexual assault. Almost every time he's on screen, Mineta is assaulting one girl or another. He doesn't ask for consent, he doesn't take no for an answer, and he violates boundaries again and again, even attempting to spy on them when they're in the sauna. Every single girl in the class is deeply uncomfortable with him, as they should be. And this is bad in and of itself, but depicting sexual assault isn't necessarily a bad thing. Plenty of pieces of media do that and use it to tell one story or another about the violence of our world, or misogyny, or whatever else. But the issue with Mineta is that everything he does is either portrayed positively or laughed off. First, despite the fact that his more righteous classmates like Midoriya know that what he's doing is wrong, none of them step in to help the girls in the class. None of these boys who are training to be heroes actually do something heroic and help people. They all laugh it off as him being goofy. And because they all laugh it off, and they're the most salient characters, the plot laughs it off too. Oh, how funny. Mineta's non-consensually buried his face in someone's boobs again. Oh, how cute and silly of him. The fact that Mineta's sexual assault and the deep discomfort it causes his female classmates is played off for laughs is deeply troubling. It indicates that both in the world of the series and in the real world, we shouldn't be concerned about this kind of behaviour. Even our heroes don't step in, indicating that to them, nothing is wrong and no one's in need of rescue. Even worse, the series tries to get us to like Mineta as a character. He's given a decent chunk of screen time, especially in the earlier seasons, about how he was bullied and wants to prove himself, and so on. He even has moments of heroism, like when he defeats Midnight against his own desires. These moments are designed to make him sympathetic and interesting. But he's a serial sexual assaulter. We shouldn't be encouraged to feel bad for him. Him being bullied sucks, sure, but it's no excuse to inflict trauma on his classmates. And you may say I and other Mineta haters are overreacting here, but don't forget that this is a show aimed at young boys, and shows aimed at kids tend to teach kids important life lessons. MHA does do this. It teaches us to be kind, work hard, work together, and be heroic. But it also includes this character who gets away with SA on an hourly basis, indicating to the young audience that, hey, if you like boobs, you too can bury your face in them non-consensually without being punished. Live out your wildest sexual dreams. Not to mention that the people who are being sexualized by Mineta and his SA are, more often than not, minors. Yes, this show makes a habit out of sexually assaulting minors, including him making sexualized remarks about Eri, a 6-year-old. It's honestly pretty disturbing to think about how this show, which is aimed at and influences kids, portrays SA not as a horrifying issue, but as a funny gag. Even worse is the fact that this did not need to be there at all. Like I said earlier, Mineta adds literally nothing to the show or to Class 1A. Literally anything he provides could well have been provided by another classmate more deserving of screen time, and that includes comedic segments about boys falling over themselves to impress girls. The fact that Mineta is completely unnecessary to the plot and didn't need to be included at all, not even for comedy or fan service reasons, makes him seem almost like a weird self-insert of Horikoshi's, which makes it even more horrifying when he assaults teenage girls. I could go on forever about how disturbing Mineta is as a character, but honestly, I think you've got the idea, and I'm sure you'll be able to find many a video or article complaining about him. In fact, I'll give you one right now. It's called Is MHA Sexist? Yes, by Lady Elnya? Sorry. Go watch. On a slightly more light-hearted note, the female characters of the show also get less character development than the male ones. This makes sense to a certain degree. I mean, this is a shounen series after all, but just because it's a shounen series doesn't mean we shouldn't or can't have good female characters. Anyone who pretends that boys can't relate to female characters is probably about to spout something about how boys will be boys and women aren't full human beings or something. But the point still stands that it's odd and disappointing that there are so many good and interesting female characters in MHA whose stories get sidelined in favour of their male counterparts, even when it wouldn't make sense to do so. We'll discuss that more in the next section though. So in summary, yes, MHA is definitely misogynistic. Is it rampant? Outside of Mineta, I'd say no, but it's still definitely present and concerning, and moreover is just straight up unnecessary, which makes it even more frustrating. So with that said, let's finally move on from this section and talk about issues people have with the characters. We could be here forever with a cast this massive, but I've shortened this to a list of the main complaints I've seen people have. First, there are the various criticisms of Midoriya and his arc. The single biggest issue I think most people have with his arc is that the first few chapters of the manga/episodes of the show set up this amazing and interesting world with a very interesting protagonist. He has no greater wish than to be a hero, but his genes have betrayed him, making him quirkless. That said, he has a massive brain and studies superheroes, villains, and their powers closely, which gives him great theoretical knowledge. So you'd think that after all of this, combined with things like Bakugo's bullying of him, the story of MHA would be about Midoriya learning to use his brains over brawn, and to overcome his limitations, not having superpowers, with his strengths, aka his brain. The easiest way to do this, as many a person has suggested, would be for him to use gadgets to fight crime as a vigilante, and get into UA that way. I mean, we know that support is an entire arm of the UA program, and support items are super important in helping heroes manage their quirks and do their jobs. So you'd think that Midoriya, when he realised he was unable to become a hero, would learn as much about supporting as possible, and would get involved in, like, support courses for kids or something, and then would spend all of his time tinkering. He'd basically become Iron Man, just with different motivations and far less money. But instead of doing the thing that would make the most sense and showing Midoriya using his big brain to become a hero by any means necessary, and then showing a great story where he beats the sludge villain with his big brain, gets into UA, and becomes a hero through the power of intelligence, hard work, and study, while fighting prejudice against quirkless people, we get him suddenly gaining powers and beating everything by punching it with brute strength, rather than using his brain. This limitation is explored in decent depth in the video essay My Problems with MHA by Pseudo Intellectual. Although this is a very valid criticism of the series, I can't actually recommend this video. Not only does it include the R slur many times, but it's also very nitpicky and has a very pretentious tone. Pseudo-intellectual seems to think they're better than everyone who likes the series and seems to always want to one-up people. Hilariously enough, the YouTube channel name, Pseudo-Intellectual, is probably designed to be satirical or sarcastic, implying that they're not just a pseudo-intellectual but a real one. But this essay makes them come across as a pseudo-intellectual because of how arrogant and nitpicky they come across as. Actually, maybe I should recommend you their video because it's a good example of a piece of media where you need to think critically. I don't like pseudo-intellectual because I think they're pretentious and arrogant, and are nitpicking things that don't need to be nitpicked and don't take away from the actual value of the series. But just because I can recognize that they have some less than savory factors and opinions about them doesn't mean that I should just automatically disregard actual criticism they have about the series, because they do have some very good points, such as how Midoriya's character arc has a lot of missed potential. That said, I would much rather recommend to you the essay Deku is an Awful MC by Monkfruit. This essay doesn't have the same problems the pseudo-intellectual one had, and provides many of the same points, arguing that since Midoriya's point of interest as a character is that he wants to be a hero while being quirkless, him gaining a quirk automatically makes him less interesting. They also point out his lack of growth and how few themes that are set up for his story are explored, and they provide examples of good moments. For instance, they wish that we could have seen more of Midoriya using his intelligence to win fights, like he did in the Tokoyami vs Moonfish fight. I also found one more essay about Midoriya's powers / lack thereof, MHA The Importance of Character by Just Stop, who discussed the weirdness of how he poses an interesting question about the nature of quirkless characters / heroes, an interesting question which was thrown out after episode 2. That said, this creator also genuinely likes Mineta and thinks he's a good character, and he doesn't like Tokoyami. Those are both massive red flags in my book. The essay also has some inconsistencies and goes back on things the creator said previously, so do with that information what you will. Another issue brought up with Midoriya in the essay The Lost Potential of MHA by Sink is the issue of his psychological motivations. Midoriya is selfless in the series to the point of self-harm and self-isolation, but none of this is actually explored in actual depth. Sink also brings up the concern that Midoriya basically thinks he's worthless, maybe even worthless to the point of deserving death, but this is never actually explored or developed in the depth it needed. It could have been a great way to add psychological depth to the story, but it just doesn't. Another essay that talks about the underexploration of Midoriya's self-sabotage is The Arc That Broke MHA by Oceaniz. I'll say Oceaniz. This video was overall good, but had some nitpicks, and was hilariously followed up by a response video, The Arc That Did Not Break MHA by Celtic Phoenix, who did have some good points but was also very nitpicky and pretentious. All of this isn't to say that Midoriya is an inherently bad character or that MHA is an inherently bad story, because that just isn't true. Both Midoriya's story and the wider MHA story are interesting and engaging, but they would have been much more thematically consistent and more in character if we saw more of Midoriya using his brain, not his fists, to solve problems. It also feels weird to set up so many stories, how he overcomes his self-doubt, how he, a quirkless kid, becomes the world's best hero, his psychological issues, only for none of that to be properly followed through on. Next, we have criticisms of our other, arguably, main character, Bakugo. Bakugo is by far and very consistently the fandom's favourite character, and for a variety of very psychological sound reasons. There's a video essay on this topic that I can recommend called 4 Psychological Reasons Fans Simp for Bakugo by Metal Zeal, which delves into some of these reasons, which of course include that he's cool, smart and a good fighter, and also that he's a very engaging character. As an anti-hero, he's more interesting than most goody two-shoes heroes, and he has an engaging arc of trying to become a better hero and person. On top of this, he has his outward bravado combined with inward anxiety and guilt about Midoriya and All Might, which makes him a very interesting and sympathetic character. I mean, along with Tokoyami, he's my favourite character too, and it's not shocking at all that he's at the top of the character polls. Mind you, I reckon that's mostly because of fanfiction on my part, as I'll discuss later. The issue many people have with his character is that he's just a terrible person, and has tons of plot armor. He's violent, he's aggressive and arrogant, insubordinate, and of course, he bullied Midoriya horribly in childhood, then took a very long time to own up to it and apologize. It's no surprise that the villains thought he'd join them. Many people describe Bakugo as a Mary Sue or Gary Stew, because that's how the story treats him. He's never punished for his bad behaviour, is privileged in the story, is the best, and everyone loves him. And this is definitely a fair argument and a genuine criticism you could have with the character and how he's handled. This is especially important to note considering he could have just been, like, a regular bully, but instead he relentlessly torments Midoriya and is probably the main reason behind why Midoriya feels so worthless and like he needs to isolate and sabotage himself. I'm genuinely surprised that Midoriya wasn't actually suicidal after everything Bakugo put him through. This isn't the kind of thing that you can come back from morally. I think Horikoshi wanted Bakugo to be likable, hence he gave him, well, everything. But he also wanted him to be a morally dubious anti-hero, so he decided that horrible, torturous bullying was the best way to go? Bakugo didn't need to be a bully to be morally grey. The simple fact that he's a hero with an attitude problem who tells people to save themselves instead of bothering him, and who yells relentlessly and recklessly endangers people should be enough. You know, maybe we could have had like a small bullying arc where he like teased Midoriya and gave him the Deku name because he's insecure about his own intelligence and bravery or something. But some of the stuff he does is just taking it way too far and makes his redemption in the storyline hard to believe. And you've already heard me complaining about pseudo-intellectual, but they did genuinely make a good point that the teachers treat Bakugo way too lightly, and he really should have been more harshly punished. Alright, next on our list is the unfortunate case of Uraraka, very wonderfully summarised in a brilliant video essay by Feral Wizard, which you may have seen if you're like one of the 30-ish people who've looked at my video essay recommendation playlist, which the video has been on for several months. I won't go into detail because I really recommend you watch that video, but basically Feral Wizard points out how Uraraka was initially introduced as a kind of stereotype, the cute anime girl, probable love interest. But as soon as her backstory and capitalistic motivations for becoming a hero were revealed, she becomes a far more interesting character. This interesting character motivation is continued in the sports festival and her battle with Bakugo, which shows her determination, resourcefulness, and intelligence, and differentiates her as a character from just attached at the hip to Midoriya. After this interesting characterization, you'd expect her to, I don't know, continue to be developed? Haha, fat chance. She basically becomes nothing other than a sweet face and love interest. Feral Wizard brings up several factors that led to the downfall of Uraraka's storyline. Her becoming none other than her crush on Midoriya, her lack of screen time, her lack of an interesting dynamic with Toga, who is a foil to her, and most annoyingly to both myself and seemingly Feral Wizard, Stain. As Feral Wizard explains, Stain's whole thing is that he only wants true heroes who aren't in it for the money, right? So here we have Uraraka, who despite only being in it for the money, does really want to be a good hero. So, of course, Uraraka plays absolutely no role in this arc, which would challenge the characters of both her and Stain. Brilliant! Feral Wizard brings up a few things, but yeah, these are the key things that stood out to me in their video. Now for a quick speed round. First, we have the common complaint that there are too many characters in the show. This is a common issue with shonens, but that doesn't mean it isn't an issue. Basically, the, in my opinion, very correct justification behind this statement is that having so many characters means it's impossible to develop them at all, or even just to develop a good number of them. This is, again, a common shonen issue, and is one that MHA unfortunately doesn't avoid. The main advantage of having tons of characters, and probably why shows do it, is that there's someone who appeals to everyone. I mean, I like Tokoyami even though he has, like, almost no character. The obvious disadvantage is, well, a smaller percentage of the cast actually have the chance to become proper developed characters. Following on from this, we have the concern that basically none of the characters are properly explored outside of our main trio of Todoroki, Bakugo, and Midoriya. Everyone else can basically rot as far as the story is concerned. And following on from both points above, there is a concern that basically none of the villains are explored as characters. People have pointed out how almost none of them actually get any motivation for their actions, which is weird in a series which ostensibly discusses some of the deeper and more nuanced aspects of a society full of heroes and people with superpowers. Yeah, like, why can't we learn more about what makes someone a villain? There are hints of things. For instance, there are several implications that many villains were persecuted because of their unusual quirks or for other reasons, or were labelled villainous from the start like Bakugo. But outside of a few villains mentioning that, there's no exploration of how society might have developed a quirk-based class system, and there's no exploration of how that class system could affect people. To summarise, the basis of the character concerns fans and critics alike bring up with MHA is that characters and stories are poorly developed. In some cases, that's just a straight-up lack of development, like with the villains and majority of the cast, and in others, it's illogical development and storylines. See Uraraka, Bakugo, and Midoriya, all of whom could have been way more interesting and developed, but had very illogical storylines. So now we move on to the next section, which is, as with most of the flaws in MHA, to do with underdevelopment. In this case, the underdevelopment of the themes of the world itself. Most of the missed opportunities in the show center around something I've already mentioned, the fact that there are so many themes, so many that are hinted at in this world, which make the world building interesting beyond UA, but are just never explored, certainly not in the depth they deserve. Most of these relate to the reality of the superhero society the characters live in. In MHA, the superhero world is highly public, highly monitored and controlled, and highly capitalistic, even though it pretends not to be. As far as I'm aware, and don't forget that I'm not a massive superhero fan and thus don't know a huge amount about the genre, this is relatively unique in the world of superhero media. It's certainly unique in the world of mass superhero media. I'm personally not aware of any movies which explore a superhero society like that, and the only TV shows I'm aware of are things like The Boys, which I don't think ever achieved mainstream success, and other anime like One Punch Man. So the fact that MHA has established this unique and very Japanese superhero society opens the world up for a huge number of very interesting themes, which are, of course, either unexplored or underexplored. So let's go through them all. First, the sexism and sexuality of the society. This is introduced from the start of the show via Mountain Lady, who is established as being popular, likely because of her sexualized character. Then we get a bunch of hints throughout the show, most notably when Momo is at her internship with Uobami, and Uobami tells Momo and Kendo about heroes taking on side jobs and becoming basically brand ambassadors. This is like a big wake-up call for Momo and Kendo, who realize that as heroes, and especially female heroes, their appearance is basically just as important as their actual skills. Hence, probably another reason why the female heroes are more generically pretty with a few accessories, as opposed to half animal or seriously deformed, for a lack of a better word, like the male ones. I don't know about you guys, but I found the combination of Mountain Lady's introduction, where she quickly gains popularity through using her sexuality, the presence of Midnight, and the Uobami Momo Kendo scene, especially the latter, very interesting. I really wanted to see how this could be applied to the daily lives of female heroes in more detail. When they get older, do they feel pressure to get surgery the same way female celebrities in our world may? Do their careers get cut short because they're past their physical prime, like K-pop idols? Similarly, is there a push for younger female heroes to appeal to the disturbing attraction society has to younger girls? We can see that female heroes are consistently more sexualized by those around them through moments like when Uraraka is first given her costume. She complains that she hadn't intended for it to be so skin tight, implying that this decision was made by the support department at the school. The decision to make a child's superhero costume more sexualized than she wanted. At least with Momo's costume, it's assumed that she designed it herself around her quirk. Uraraka's costume has no such explanation, and even though she expresses she's uncomfortable with it, well, what a shocker, it never changes throughout the series. I guess she's just doomed, like all female heroes, to be sexualized forever. This is very consistent with women and girls in entertainment in our world being sexualized against their will by the usually male adults around them. See literally any clip ever of any celebrity, idol, public figure, etc. talking about how they were uncomfortable about an outfit, an action they had to do, or how they were sexualized from a young age, etc., etc. MHA had a chance to go really deep into the various insidious aspects of the sexualization of heroes, especially female heroes, but also male ones. How do the female heroes feel about the fact that their ranking may be less dependent on the number of villains they've defeated or civilians they've saved, and more dependent on how many hair and makeup ads they did in that week? I guess we'll never know because MHA never actually develops in depth any of its female characters, especially not in terms of their inner thoughts on the sexism of their society. Okay, next, one of the biggest aspects of world building which is consistently present in the franchise is the nature of heroes as public figures, and the nature of their rankings being influenced by the public perception of them. This means that heroes like celebrities, and more specifically like idols, have to constantly manage their personal images to stay on top. They have companies, PR managers, and so on. I don't think I mentioned it here, but the reason I specifically made the comparison to idols here is because each hero has their own concept, and idols specifically have concepts which may not exist in other industries. In UA, we see the students having to come up with their own hero personas and names, and they are criticised based on whether those names and personas are inviting, relevant, and inspiring or not. This theme is slightly more explored in the franchise, but only because of the loss of All Might and the subsequent breakdown of faith in heroes in society. There are two main repeated ideas here. First, how All Might keeps talking about how a hero needs to present a positive image, a smile, regardless of how much pain they might be in. And second, how Endeavour is criticised by society and constantly falling short in comparison to All Might because of how his image is nastier and scary. He doesn't come off as selflessly as All Might, and the public, a collectivistic Japanese public, mind you, don't appreciate that. I and many others would have liked to have seen more about the effect of the need for good PR and a good public image on heroes. Do heroes feel a sense of disconnect and a loss of identity as their public personas are different from their real selves? Do they struggle to maintain this persona in the heat of battle? How do heroes feel about the fact that they, like idols, can basically do nothing right? What are some PR strategies that companies have developed in case one of their heroes gets caught, for instance, ignoring a fan, doing drugs, or even dating a low-level villain? How do companies deal with heroes like Bakugo who are more anti-heroes, or heroes with villainous characteristics? What are the kinds of scandals that heroes' careers can survive, and which are the ones that are completely career-ruining? Do heroes see their careers flash before their eyes if, God forbid, they mention anything vaguely related to sex? How are stock prices affected by various hero activities? I find PR and how it interacts with capitalist systems very interesting, especially in celebrity contexts, which is what we're looking at here. And while MHA does show hints of the implications of this system through the public loss of faith in heroes after All Might's retirement, well, I would have loved to have seen it explored more. Related to the capitalistic aspects of the hero system, I want to see how different heroes and companies are constantly trying to one-up each other. Are there generations of heroes where in one generation cool anti-heroes are more popular, and in the next classic heroes like All Might are more popular and profitable? Do more sinister heroes like Eraserhead struggle to get jobs? Also, as I mentioned earlier, Uraraka. How many people now want to be heroes because they think it will bring them fame and money, as opposed to because they want to help people? Has hero society led to an increase in class divides, or has it closed the class gap a bit? What do the public think about people who have more selfish motivations for being heroes? Do companies try to hide this? What are the dangers of selfish motivations? Do heroes get excluded from society if this motivation is discovered? Are they less likely to risk themselves in battle, or perceived that way? Also, in MHA, quirks and heroes are highly controlled. Quirks are tracked, recorded, and kept in databases, including their various upper bounds and weaknesses. Although MHA offers a vision of a world where heroes are arguably more idealized, working with the government and law instead of being vigilantes, the franchise still underexplores the nature of the government having so much data and control. Do heroes feel bogged down by the law and overregulated? What are the privacy concerns citizens have or don't have about the government having so much personal data on them? Is this an extension of the surveillance state? Will there be a government one day which wants to go a step further and collect DNA from everyone? Are they going to start selling data? What are the social implications of a bone in the foot, something which in no way actually defines a person or their personality, being labelled as defining people? Are there classes of quirks which are enforced by the system? Stain and Shigaraki would suggest so. What are the implications of this for things like quirk marriages? Is there basically a widespread acceptance of eugenics? Is Japan now a global superpower because of its high number of quirk users? Are the quirkless basically second-class citizens, or do we just get the impression that they're treated badly because Midoriya himself was bullied? Are there accessibility issues with quirks? Like, are people with uncontrollable fire quirks unable to go out in the rain? Are they banned from libraries and public transport? Do heroes with non-human facial features get excluded from things like passport picture recognition, phone facial recognition, and so on? How does Hakagure even have any quality of life being uncontrollably invisible? Historically, the collection of biometric data like this is used to reinforce or create class hierarchies, so we'd expect something like this to happen in MHA too, but we never hear about it. And of course, there's no exploration of the morals of turning people's lived experiences into just binary code. Even more so, is this science real, or is this a pseudoscience that is being used to label children as evil based on their quirks, as with phrenology, as I mentioned earlier? This kind of thing is very dystopian, and MHA tries to insist again and again that it's basically a utopian society with a few bad eggs. But isn't that in and of itself a dystopian theme? There's so many interesting questions about the nature of the documentation and regulation of quirks that are just, you guessed it, unexplored. And finally, in the end, unless I've seriously missed something and other people on the internet are also crazy, despite the hero society in MHA having so many dystopian elements, the story is not about attempting to fix the system and change society, but instead about sticking with and maintaining the status quo. Midoriya doesn't learn to become a great hero despite being quirkless by working outside the system and using his own brains, and there's no focus on providing therapy for heroes and villains alike. There's no exploration about how villains tend to be children or those with mental health concerns who were ignored or stigmatized by society, and there's no discussion of how societal rejection can lead to deviance or how that could be solved. There's never any question of whether the heroes are morally right or not. They're always assumed to be right, and the current system is assumed to be good. There are bad people causing issues, it's not a bad system. Or at least that's what the show tells us. An interesting message that is both very Japanese and very American at the same time, I think. I mean, it is a collectivistic society, so it makes sense that people wouldn't want to challenge the system, but like, where's the thematic depth? Are heroes, just like so many celebrities and idols, doomed to try and be subversive, but still within the bounds of the system and status quo? You may notice that I've made a lot of comparisons to idols here, and yeah, this channel is mostly about K-pop, so I'm predisposed to think in terms of idols, but I'm not just talking about K-pop idols here. I'm talking about idols as a whole, and especially J-pop idols. And it makes sense that the hero system in MHA would have parallels to the idol system. I mean, to start with, the idol system as we know it originated in Japan, influenced by Japan's unique celebrity culture. And of course, both the idol system and the hero system involve taking young children and training them for years on end to come into a public life, where their careers are, yes, based on their skills, but more importantly, based on the public's perception of them. Hence, a system in which both heroes and idols experience sexualization and sexism, public relation crises, having to fake personas, and bizarre and roundabout interactions with capitalism. Which is perhaps one of the reasons I find this so interesting and also so disappointing. So, in summary, MHA has many an interesting theme which make the world seem far wider and deeper. There are hints of these interesting ideas throughout the show: the sexualization of female heroes, the creation of a fake persona which must stand even on the border of death, the importance of being liked by the public, quirk class structures, privacy concerns, and more. Any one of these themes could be a very interesting basis for an entire arc or show, yet none of them are explored in the depth they deserve. This doesn't make MHA bad. Almost every piece of media has hints of some unique themes which aren't explored in as much depth as they deserve. MHA can be and is still good without these themes. It's just not anywhere near as good as it could be, which is a shame for those of us who really like it. Now let's take a quick detour for some overarching issues with the structure of the series. Even massive fans of the series tend to bring these up as issues, so I don't know, they're clearly big concerns regardless of whether you're an MHA superfan or a hater. First, the pacing of the series. The entire main series, including multiple large arcs, takes place in Midoriya's first year at UA. All of it. I shouldn't need to tell you that this just feels like a bad idea from a storytelling perspective, no matter how well it's executed. For stories set in high school or as youths, it's common for one big event to happen each year. A great example of this is Harry Potter or even Percy Jackson. Actually, since it's popular right now, Wednesday is a good example too. This is just like a common sense structure. Thus, it makes sense that for all of these shows and series, the final big battle takes place in the final year of school, after the main character has had the chance to learn and develop as much as possible. And also so that we don't have 11-year-olds saving the world. There's only so far suspension of disbelief can go. This is such an obvious structure that even though I hadn't read the manga or watched the entire show, I had just assumed that the final war arc took place at the end of Midoriya's final year of school. A fair assumption to make, I thought. But then I find out that it apparently takes place in first year still? Like what? Why is there so much stuff happening in first year? Did Midoriya and his friends have a single normal week at school after all of this? This makes the story, no matter how much time it takes in our real world, feel rushed because it all happens in a single year in universe. Thus, the insane strength development that the characters and their powers experience, the vast political upheaval after All Might's retirement, the various villains which rise, are defeated, and are replaced, and so on, all takes place in 1 year, which is super unbelievable. Hence, it's borderline impossible to make this feel well-paced. This is a decision which baffles me and other fans alike. Bizarre. Second, there are criticisms from fans that the arcs got worse over time. I don't have a personal opinion on this, but it does make sense for several reasons. First, it's always easier for a story to start with a compelling idea than to finish with one. Anyone can make a decently interesting start of a story, but it's harder to continue that in a consistent and engaging way over multiple arcs, and it's harder still to end that story in a satisfying and thematically meaningful way. Not to mention that nostalgia is also powerful, duh. Of course people will like the earlier arcs more in general because they have nostalgia for those arcs. Finally, the inconsistent power between arcs. Sometimes characters' power levels seem to be adjusted either up or down, not because they actually earned that power increase and not because they had something happen to them that made their power level decrease, but because the plot demanded it, aka the single worst reason possible. And sometimes there are weaknesses characters have, like Midoriya's issue with breaking his bones, which just aren't really discussed past a certain point. Like there's the whole, oh, don't break your bones anymore or you won't be able to use your hands thing. And then he still does it? Like, what was the point of that? The other thing is that the character's power growth can be inconsistent. Despite all of the members of Class 1A realistically working equally hard to improve, only some of them actually feel like they improve, and we almost never see actual adult heroes grow as individuals. These growth issues aren't technically a big issue, they're pretty common to shonens in my experience, and shonens do have a tendency to have plot-driven elements rather than character-driven events. But just because this is far from the most glaring issue doesn't mean it isn't an issue, and won't take some audience members out of the story. Alright, now let's move on to the final main issue, the fandom. I can't say much on this since I actually haven't been involved in the fandom much at all, but I have heard things, which I think are at least worth mentioning, considering the breadth of this video. First, a lot of people say that the fandom is just generally cringe. This covers everything. Weird and cringe cosplays, weeboos, people making edgy Mary Sue OCs, and of course the absolute insistence that some people have that you must call the series Boku no Hero Academia, and anyone who calls it My Hero Academia or watches the dub is a heretic and doesn't truly love the series. You're a fake fan. Most of this is much more harmless than most people act like it is. People make bad cosplays, people make bad OCs. These are just things that all of us do on our fandom journeys, and those things may be cringe, sure, but they're harmless. The less harmless things are the obsessive purists and the weeboos. I mean, maybe this is a controversial take, but I think that weeboos are generally harmless. The problem comes when they start invading people's privacy, fetishizing Japanese people, and doing things that would definitely fall more under cultural appropriation than cultural appreciation. Basically, when they become obsessive and lose self control. Similarly, purists are generally harmless. I mean, I'll never watch a dubbed anime if I can avoid it. The issue, again, comes when they're obsessive. Someone who will only ever watch the subbed anime or call the show Boku no Hero Academia is harmless. Someone who pushes other people out of the fandom because they call those people fake fans for not being super fans is a completely different issue. This is an issue that exists in most fandoms. Some people just don't seem to be able to grasp the concept that casual fans of something exist, and call the casual fans fake fans. Speaking of sexism, just as sexism exists in the franchise, it exists in the fandom as well. There is a huge trend, especially in historically male-dominated fandoms like anime and video games, of the fake fan accusations being leveled largely against women, regardless of whether those women are casual fans or super fans. Female fans are required to prove that they're worthy of being a fan through showing extensive knowledge of a subject, listing every single arc, listing certain obscure details on a character, proving that their favourite character isn't a generic main character choice, and so on. In fact, even if a woman picks a unique favourite character, this can just be dismissed as a bad choice. These are the kinds of tests that male fans never have to go through, and is a massive barrier to female fans participating in fandom. They feel forced out and questioned constantly. No one wants to go to a con and have their worthiness of being there challenged. This basically comes from people not understanding the fact that fandom is for everyone, and acting immaturely about fandom membership. There's also a large number of incels in anime fandoms, the negative implications of which I shouldn't need to explain, especially on women. Anyway, let's move on. I have also heard rumours that fans have sent death threats to the creator Horikoshi. This is a weird accusation because some people are convinced that it happened and others claim it was a rumour spread by an anti-fan on YouTube. Regardless of whether these particular rumours are correct, I imagine that considering the size of the fandom, there has been at least some bad behaviour towards Horikoshi, and statistically there must have been at least one death threat sent his way. This is, unfortunately, something that happens in almost every fandom, as with most things in this section, but is still, of course, bad and unacceptable. There has been a history, albeit of course a small minority, of people in the MHA fandom basically creeping on minors. To be fair, this occurs in every fandom, but is very salient in MHA because of the fact that the characters are in high school. The big thing here is that there are certain numbers of adult fans in their 20s and older who act creepily towards the minor characters. This can include writing erotica of minor characters, body pillows, general weirdness, sexualized roleplays, and so on. I don't think I should have to tell you why it's bizarre for a 40-year-old to write fanfiction of two teenagers having insane amounts of explicit sex. And on a slightly different but very similar note, the fanfiction and shipping wars. Obviously, the vast majority of fanfiction and shipping is perfectly chill and not at all creepy towards the characters. I don't mean to say that most MHA fanfiction, or even a good chunk of it, is older adults writing sex of teenagers. The point is more related to the within fandom shipping conflicts. MHA has a lot of ships, as happens when you have lots of characters, and some of those ships are very popular, and some of those popular ships overlap. Hence, shipping wars. Is Midoriya best with Uraraka, Bakugo, or Todoroki? I don't know, but different groups of fans will be able to tell you in no uncertain terms why their belief is best and the others are wrong. Is Uraraka better because she's basically the canon love interest, or is she a boring choice? Does Bakugo provide a good dynamic, or do Midoriya Bakugo ships completely discount Midoriya's trauma and mischaracterize Bakugo? Is Todoroki a compelling I can fix him option, or is that just too cliche? That's just one of the many shipping conflicts in the fandom. People argue over canon and lack of canon, heterosexuality versus homosexuality, and the assumption of characters' sexualities and other identities, mischaracterization in fanfiction, and so on. This becomes an issue when people are hating on each other and their interpretations of the story, when massive public conflicts break out, and when people start being homophobic because God forbid some random teenager thinks it would be cool and interesting if Midoriya and Bakugo kissed. Truly, the gay agenda will destroy the world. With this comes all of the potential issues of gay shipping too, like the fetishization of gay people, which is nowhere near as rife in any fandom as people act like it is, but is still, of course, an issue. Another issue in the fandom is the presence of antis, or people who used to be fans and became antis. MHA the anime has had an infamous period on YouTube where it was being absolutely torn to shreds by everyone under the sun, which obviously created a lot of conflict between people who thought the series was the most trash overhyped thing ever, and the people who thought it was the best anime to ever exist. There was especially a trend of people who used to be big fans and then supposedly saw the light and realized how bad the show was, and those people had a tendency to make incredible numbers of videos bashing the show like no one's business, all while talking in thesaurus speak and acting like they were smarter and better than the other fans because they'd seen the truth, which of course created even more conflict and has polarized the online community around the show. All of these fandom concerns are only a small number of fans, and most of them only become issues when people start getting obsessive and toxic over them. Also, they all exist in almost every fandom to exist in the history of humanity, from anime and manga, to Western TV and movies, to music, to sport, and so on. But the fact of the matter is that they do push potential fans away, and give the fandom a bad reputation, and are also very interesting in my opinion. Anyway, I've talked for a very long time about the positives and negatives of the franchise, so let's sum all of that up and give my final evaluation of MHA. Yeah, is MHA good or bad, Casper? In an answer that is probably very predictable to you if you know me or my channel, or even just glanced at the chapter titles, it depends. It's a bit of both. A mixed bag! What a shocker. MHA has a lot of really good things to recommend it. An interesting world, interesting characters, an absolute banger of a soundtrack, some interesting themes which are unique in the world of mainstream superhero media, a fun power system, and epic action sequences, as befits a shounen. Speaking of, it is genuinely a really good shounen, and fulfills all of the fantasies of a shounen. On the other hand, it's weirdly misogynistic, doesn't fully develop its characters, has some glaring structural issues, has a fandom with some major issues, and fails to fully explore the various and very interesting thematic questions the story poses. So I suppose the question is, would I recommend you watch, read, or otherwise engage with this franchise if for some reason you've watched this far into the video and have never checked it out? Yes, definitely, I would recommend the franchise, but I recommend you consume it with a grain of salt and with a critical eye. Don't just blindly love it, and don't just blindly hate it either, I guess, but I kind of doubt that anyone is hate watching this video of all videos anyway. But I do have one last thing to say. MHA has issues, right? There are very few people who actually think it's a perfect show. So how do we, as fans, deal with the problems involved in the franchise? There's one very powerful and very predictable solution. Wahaha, bow down to AO3. Fanfiction has existed since literally forever, and since literally forever has existed because fans aren't quite getting the satisfaction they're looking for in something they like. In the case of many anime and fiction stories, this lack of satisfaction tends to come from the canon deviating from what the fans wanted to happen, whether that be themes being underexplored, weird character decisions made, or, most commonly, two people not getting together when the fans wanted them to. But just because shipping is a huge motivation of fanfiction doesn't mean that fanfiction is all just shallow romance, or even that shallow romance is a bad thing. It's not. Like I mentioned just a few lines ago, many fanfictions also try to explore underexplored characters or themes in more detail, or try to fix the pacing and plot issues of the original media. Now, I have an admission to make here. I actually haven't read that much fanfiction. Shocking, I know. Actually, I've surprised people several times in real life because they assume, because of the way I talk about fanfiction and because of comments I've made in videos, that I'm an avid reader of it. And I'm sorry to let you guys down, but I'm not. I've certainly read my fair share of fanfiction, but I definitely seem like a far bigger reader than I am, and I honestly have read less and less fanfiction as I've grown older, and I was never like a massive consumer to begin with. I don't think I've even touched AO3 outside of direct research for videos in like maybe a year and a half. But just because I don't read much fanfiction doesn't mean that I don't have an incredible appreciation for its role in fandom, and in the case of MHA, in its role in allowing fans to explore the themes the canon doesn't. Literally all of the canon issues I mentioned, fanfiction fixes them. You can find fanfictions which fix the pace of the series, which give the characters the PTSD they realistically should be experiencing in the canon, which delve into minor characters in more depth, which imagine how characters' quirks could be further used, and most importantly to me, which explore the various themes I wish were explored more. Also, is Bakugo a feminist icon in the canon? No, but he is in the fanfiction. Woohoo! I've read some great MHA fanfictions which have explored the various details of the hero world, such as criticising the parasocial relationships the civilians have with the heroes, probably written by a K-pop fan, exploring the sexualization of female heroes, looking at what a PR hell Bakugo would be for his future company, and so on. Any issue you have with the series, I'm sure you can find a fanfiction to fix it. I mean, there's a reason there's literally thousands of fics which replace Mineta in Class 1A with Shinso. People just collectively agree that he's trash and useless. There is one major concern with MHA fanfiction I've heard mentioned, and have even mentioned myself outside of the ones I've already discussed, and that is how MHA fanfiction seems very intent on mischaracterizing the various characters of the series. Which, like, yeah, the mischaracterization of literally everyone under the sun is very rampant in MHA fanfiction, but at the same time I feel like, is it really an issue? Does it really matter? Like, really, truly? I personally feel like most of the mischaracterizations I've seen have made characters better, or at the very least have developed them more. Todoroki's self-harming and having developed an eating disorder may well be someone's wump fantasy, but it also genuinely makes sense in terms of the story. Bakugo actually not being a terrible person means that his being treated well by other students and staff makes more sense, and him going deaf because of his quirk and thus learning sign language is like how human bodies work around loud noises, and also just good representation. In fanfictions, we can genuinely explore Ashido's life, her insecurities and dreams, and the different ways in which she might develop her powers past the canon. We can see how Momo becomes a solid base for her friends, and how a good chunk of fics feature both her and Shinso far more prominently than the actual series does. None of this is canon, and many things are mischaracterizations based on the canon, but if they're even arguably improvements, I don't know, what is there to complain about? I think it's fun, but we should also be aware of these canon fandom differences, hence one of the reasons I referred to Gunnock in my Zero Base 1 episode as fandom Bakugo, not canon Bakugo, because let's be serious, he's nothing like canon Bakugo. In fanfictions, characters get developed more, and we can see the actual exploration of themes the series hinted at. As I mentioned earlier, fanfictions seem especially interested in the idea of the PR of being a hero, and the parasocial relationship between heroes and fans. This makes sense since a lot of anime fanfiction writers are also K-pop fans, and thus experience that same fan culture with invasions of privacy, PR nightmares, and so on. TLDR, fanfiction fixes all, which is like 99% of the point of fanfiction anyway. So, on that happy note, let's finish up this video. TLDW. MHA has both good and bad elements and is overall a fun series I would recommend you engage with, whether it be via the manga, anime, or otherwise. Fanfiction fixes all of the problems with the series, and I've found some of it very interesting and engaging, as long as there aren't teenagers having sex written by grown adults. Fanfiction allows fans to explore the more practical and down-to-earth details of the show, how powers would affect characters, the emotional toll of being a hero, the day-to-day aspect of capitalistic hero societies, i.e. the fact that 99% of the characters are characterized in fanfiction as hating the huge amounts of office work that they have to do. I suppose the other solution to the problem would be to make it a seinen series, not a shounen, but I think that's too much to hope for. If you liked this video, you'll probably enjoy a good chunk of the video essays I mentioned in this video. They go into more depth on similar topics. I'll link the main ones I used in the reference document, and we'll also link a huge playlist of MHA video essays you can watch if you're interested. I haven't seen all of them, but I have added some of my favourites to the recommended video essays playlist on my channel. At the end of the day, as disorganised as this video is, I really wanted to discuss this series. It's been pretty foundational to both mainstream manga and anime in the past, decade, and has a fascinating premise which I think is pretty unique in superhero media. Although it misses a few marks and is perhaps a little overhyped, I think it's certainly worth checking out for those of us who like the idea of superheroes, but not so much the shallow villain punching that many modern movies have turned into. That honestly sounds bad, considering MHA has a lot of shallow villain punching, and one of the main criticisms I've brought up in this video is the fact that Midoriya shallowly punches villains instead of using his brain. But MHA has, I would argue, more depth than a lot of similar media. And here is the MHA video, 2 years after actually it's been more than 2 years now. Almost 3 years after it was supposed to be released. A lot longer than it was originally supposed to be, and honestly a lot more critical than it was originally supposed to be. But I think there's a lack of videos which discuss both the positives and negatives of the show especially. They exist, but they're few and far between in such a polarized fan community. On the bright side, having extra time to stew in this has really let me see just how influenced MHA is by the blend of Japanese and American cultural influences, and how many parallels there are specifically between the East Asian idol system and the hero system in universe, which I think is interesting. So with that, we've reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.